Hello, how are you doing? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to look back on New Zealand against Australia in the Rugby Championship. The game has just finished. It probably sets New Zealand up to win the Rugby Championship, but we do have to wait until the end of the Argentina-South Africa game later. But I'm going to get into it from the All Blacks perspective and the Wallabies perspective as well, looking back on the Rugby Championship as a whole. If you're new here, please subscribe, like the video and comment down below on anything that I touch upon or just your own thoughts on both of these sides and what we've seen so far. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so New Zealand 40, Australia 14, the final game for both of these sides in the Rugby Championship. Bit of a disappointing match, really, particularly after how good the match we saw last week in Melbourne was. In terms of tries, New Zealand with 5 tries, one of them a penalty try, 2 tries to Australia. It was just so one-sided in the end, which, as I say, after what we saw last week in a game which was, I said on this channel, one of the best international matches I've seen for a long, long time. It was disappointing that this one was just so one-sided. So as I mentioned in the intro in this video, just my thoughts on both of these sides, what we've seen so far, and then looking ahead with about a year to go in the World Cup. Let's start off with the All Blacks. I think it'd be really easy to start with Australia, but New Zealand, let's give them the credit they deserve, because we've seen this season that despite the fact that they're not as good as the All Blacks sides that we've seen in the past, where they just won pretty much every game, they are more susceptible to a defeat. But they're still an incredibly good outfit. We saw that in the game today against Australia. We saw it in the first game, actually, of their 3-match series against Ireland, when Ireland actually went on to record a historic series victory. But that first test match, New Zealand put in a really good performance there. And there have still been good performances this season, but there's also been those defeats as well against Argentina, against Ireland, as I just mentioned. So they're not quite as good as they once were, but they're still quite a formidable side. At the moment, I'd probably put them about 3rd in the world rankings. I think Ireland and France are probably the best 2 sides, and then you've got South Africa and New Zealand coming up behind them. So they're still a really serious outfit. And you think about it, and all of the conversation around New Zealand this year has been Foster needs to go, Sam Cane shouldn't be the captain. And I think those conversations are still valid and relevant and worth having. But the reason that they're perhaps so magnified is because of how good New Zealand have been before. In a sense, I feel like New Zealand, or this current New Zealand side, are a victim of their own success. You look at the sides of, Dan Carter, Richie McCaw, Kieran Reid. New Zealand were pretty much the best sports team in the world across all sports. Like, you could genuinely have made that argument. Their win percentage was high into the 90s. It was utterly ridiculous, which means when we get to now, where they're still a really good side, they're still one of the best sides in the world who on their day are capable of beating anyone. But we get to this point where we see them lose a bit more often. They're not quite as strong. And all of a sudden, perhaps it's magnified. I don't know. All Blacks fans, I'll be interested to hear your take on this. But certainly from my perspective, you don't fear the All Blacks in the way you once did. But at the same time, they're probably going to end up winning the Rugby Championship. This All Blacks side that need a new head coach and need a new captain and aren't as good are still one of the best sides in the world. So I think it's a bit of a contradiction there. I said in my previous video, where I was mainly reacting to the Matteo Reynal decision at the end of last week's Bledisloe Cup match, that the victory for New Zealand shouldn't mask the overall issues with the team. And maybe I was being a bit premature, I don't know. Maybe I was being a bit reactionary. I think there is still concerns for New Zealand, but they are still a serious outfit. This, if they are to win the Rugby Championship, which I would imagine they will, barring a really big victory for South Africa later on today, they're in a pretty good place, maybe just not as strong a place as we've seen them in previous seasons. All Blacks fans would love to hear your thoughts actually on your side, the direction of them. Foster and Cane, have that kind of been put to bed a little bit in terms of the discussion around them, and just overall what you think of them at the moment, because I'm kind of reevaluating some of my own stances on it. And I think, maybe it's just the case of this New Zealand team still really, really good. They're just not as completely and utterly dominant as we've seen in previous years. And that's why everything seems worse when actually it's still pretty good. I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. Let's move on to the Wallabies, because again, Australia, you just can't work out at the moment, I don't think. And before this video, I was thinking, well, I still think there's green shoots for Australia. I think they are starting to play some better stuff. They're starting to have a back row, which if they can get them on the field on a consistent basis, could trouble anyone. They've got guys that can unlock the game. Bernard Foley coming back in, I personally like to see that. I think he's been Australia's best 10 or most consistent 10 over the last 10 years or so, probably just under 10 years, but over a long period of time. We haven't seen Quade Cooper. He's got to come back in. Karevi's got to come back in. Hooper, the captain, needs to come back into the side. He's taken time out. So there's a lot of things like that which make me think, well, Australia should be all right. But then you look at it and they're the lowest they've ever been in the world rankings. They are incredibly inconsistent, both in terms of actual games, like during games and each game after the other. So, I mean, you know, during a game, they could look really good, then give away a load of penalties and concede points. And then they could have one really good performance, a good result, and they're not able to back that up. So I don't really know where the Wallabies are at the moment. You look at the game today and they flashed up a stat on the screen with basically the last play of the game where they'd missed something like 26, 27 tackles. Their discipline's been really, really poor. I think that's a massive point of contention because across the whole Rugby Championship, they're conceding a lot more penalties than the other three sides. We saw them get 2 yellow cards in the opening half hour against the All Blacks today. We've seen discipline and ill discipline be a massive issue for them in recent times. So I'm not sure with Australia quite where they're heading. I want to believe that they're almost about to turn a corner, but we need to see it consistently in their results. And they might throw a good result in there. They won the first test against England in their 3-match summer series. They've had good performances and victories in the Rugby Championship. They will feel they should have beaten New Zealand in Melbourne last weekend. But it's always a but. They're never quite getting there. So at the moment, the jury's still out really on where they are. I think rugby in Australia as a whole is an issue as well. There are people that will know a lot more than that than I do, but Aussie rules and cricket, and it's just lagging behind a lot of other sports, rugby league as well, of course, that I do kind of fear for Australia of whether they are now at the point where they are an inconsistent and maybe not top tier international side in the way that New Zealand and South Africa. I couldn't necessarily throw the Northern Hemisphere teams in there because we do see Ireland and England and France fluctuate, but whether we're going to see Australia on a regular basis being one of those top sides in the world. Again, Wallabies fans, really interested to hear your views on that. Part of me really likes this Australia side. I like a lot of their players. I don't think they maybe quite have the strength in depth. Maybe that's one of the key factors. But what do you make of your team? Are you worried about the game or the structure of rugby in Australia and the results that you're seeing on a wider basis? Do you think you've seen enough that maybe they will be okay? Because I'm not sure really. And I thought off the back of last week, if Australia could have backed it up, even just with a good performance, and even if they didn't get a result, because they haven't won in New Zealand since 2001, if they could back it up with a result today, then I might have said, do you know what, there's enough there. But I just don't know. They're so inconsistent. They're just consistently not getting the results. And I think we need to see more from them. But that's my kind of couple of quick thoughts after that match. We'll wait and see what happens in the match between Argentina and South Africa later. But as I say, we're all expecting New Zealand to win the Rugby Championship, which, given what happened against Ireland, given the defeat against Argentina, given the furore around the conversation of the All Blacks, is still a pretty good result. Remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it, all that sort of jazz. Most importantly, I love to hear from you. Comment down below with what you make of these two sides. See you in the next one.